Okay, Vic, thank you so much for coming. We really want to put together a program that'll help people make a research career and fund the grants for the work they care about. So
Great,
thank
glad
you
to
very
be here.
much. Thanks. Joe is here as our representative novice researcher to keep us real and to make sure he learns what he would like to know. So maybe other people want to know that too.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. The way we're starting is because we're talking about grant writing, we're starting with a question just about writing words on a page when you're writing a grant more than a manuscript.
Sure.
Do you have any things that that really work for you now or used to work for you to help people get some tips about writing?
Absolutely. I think writing, one of the things I think about is one, it takes practice. So the more you write, the better you get. So manuscripts are a good prep for grant writing. Secondly, I think it's helpful is having a example or two. This is what this sponsor may want. This is what this mechanism wants to see. Career development, pilot data, not. And so having other examples as you're trying to write your first one is very helpful, as opposed to taking a blank sheet of paper and just writing for the first time. So those are two good ones. The third one, I would say, is getting input. I think it's hard for some early researchers where they're almost offended that someone would critique their work because they put so much heart into it and probably spent 50 hours writing it, and then someone tells you how bad it is. But be open to that early on, saying, hey, yep, that sounds great. I want 10 people to look at it. People who've been funded in this area, people who are critical. If everyone says it's great, it's not good enough. And then the fourth thing I would say is plan to iterate. Like plan to rewrite it over and over and over again. I think early on people think, well, I've written it once, I got edits, I've written it twice, we're good. 10, 12, 15 times is a normal thing. So.
Can I build on that? Because we just were talking to another researcher who said, plan 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 months to write a grant, depending on the mechanism, because it takes so many times.
Yes.
So that aligns with what you're saying. It takes, it's not a weekend kind of operation.
Right. I think some people think, the first time in, I'll knock it out in a weekend. But the other thing with that timeline that you talk about is remember you're asking hopefully very senior people or experienced people. They're busy. So a lot of times the time lag in that 9 months is sending it to them, being respectful of their time, getting it back, making the changes. So it's not just your time for 9 months. It's everyone you're working with for 9 months. And that's where people, I think, also have a misstep.
I mean, how are you finding the people to submit them to? Like the senior members, who are you looking for? What area are you looking for?
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Trying to find the people to look at it and to edit it.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Because typically it's through a network, so maybe you have some mentors, or they have colleagues or mentors, or asking people who have been funded by that sponsor, or who are just really critical, can really look at a grant and are used to critiquing it. And I'll probably say the first couple of times you're probably not going to find the right people. You're going to get some people who are going to make some edits, and hopefully it's helpful. The more you do it, the more you'll find the right people who you can trust. They'll be constructive. They'll make the proper edits, and their advice is going to be helpful. But I think it takes, being a little bit vulnerable. And sometimes you're going to reach out to people you don't know, or a colleague of a colleague to get those folks in. And the more you do it, the more you'll find the right network of people to edit your work.
I think you brought up a couple of points, Vic, I just want to pick up on. One is you said you might find somebody who's just really good at critiquing grants. And so I guess this is part of one mentorship role is just like a career mentor, or it could be a grant writing mentor. They don't need to know your content.
Right.
In fact, there's value to them not knowing your content.
Absolutely.
You're asking that outsider question. So sometimes I've read some of your grants, especially even the more translational grants.
Right.
I'm not a basic scientist, but I don't need to be, because guess what? There are more people like me than not on that review. And if I can't follow along on page 1, we are in some trouble.
Yeah.
So I'm asking what do you mean by this? What do you mean? It's a very helpful to have some people reading who truly are not in your inner circle.
Absolutely.
It's not your content mentor. It's not your fellowship director. It's somebody fresh.
I agree with that.
You
I
know.
think it's really important to have someone who does not know your topic, has not read your grant, is not your direct mentor, because a lot of it is about construction of the flow and the logic and where are the points that at the beginning that get your attention. And that because your study section or your review panel is going to be people who don't know your work and don't know you, it's actually helpful to have someone who does not know your topic at all, but who's willing to read it and make real criticisms on it.
Okay, can I ask a question? Sometimes we say, well, find other junior people who are writing grants and have them look at it too. But if they've never had a funded grant and you know, can they help you? To what extent can a peer be helpful if they haven't gotten a grant? They're trying to get their first grant too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if they're in the same space, both competing heavily and submitting grants, maybe haven't got their big ones, they're also gleaming some like tips or tricks from their mentors, and they can bring those to you. Yeah, I don't really know. I haven't seen this. I haven't got my grant funded before, but I talked to my mentor, and they said these 3 things are important. And you would have not gotten that had you talked to someone who's senior, who's been doing this for 20 years. So I think sometimes having someone who's just as in the same place where you are, competing and submitting grants, they can bring some tips to you may not have seen otherwise, and still having those mid or senior level folks who are very sophisticated can in a moment look at your Ames page or grant and say, no, that does not flow, or they'll never fund this, or you need to have this one thing in there for that mechanism. So a combination of both.
Are people often reaching out to you to look at grants?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you get those, however many emails, how do you decide, I'll look at this, I'm not going to look at this, or what's the difference?
It's hard. I try and do as best I can to help them. Sometimes it depends on my schedule, what timeline they give me. If they say I need it by Wednesday and it's Tuesday, they say I'm going to submit in 4 months, can you send me edits back in a week? So some of it's based on time. But if they've reached out to me, I know they're hungry and looking for something and some help, I'll try to do my best I can to get edits back to them as well. Or I'll say, I can edit this piece and this is my thoughts, but you should really talk to so-and-so because they're really good about that particular topic or that particular mechanism. I think that's sometimes where I'm more helpful.
That's nice. I also think you can, choose a section. Sometimes it's the Ames page because it's so critical.
Yes.
And you can give some feedback. You're not going to line edit, but you're going to say, this is very compelling. I just did this for a colleague. I got an email over the weekend. There's a special announcement. So it's a short timeline, but it's not this person's fault, right? Yep. So that's important. You don't feel like, what the heck? Please don't create an urgency for me. And I could just read it with the big picture in mind. And I gave a couple of sentence ideas, but really I was like, really great. I was looking for this and this. Think about whether that would strengthen it. And it's just like what you do for people. And it makes me a better writer.
Absolutely. Seeing the numbers even for myself to grow. One other thing that might be helpful is when you submit your grant to somebody to review, sometimes it's easier for them to meet with you. Because sometimes it can take, it depends on the person, the timing. They may say, no, it's easier for me just to put some comments on Word and then send it back to you. Some may say, hey, let's just talk it through. And and you can show up and then they can walk it through and they can just give you spontaneous comments. Sometimes that can be more helpful because they can be a little more honest and a little more nuanced. They're not going to line item read it, but they will send you comments about flow and structure. That's probably just hard to type in comments on the Word. So that's another tactic to ask. Would you prefer just to edit it, or do you want to meet in person for 20 minutes and just talk it out? Sometimes I do that because it's helpful for me just to talk it out quickly, and that would have taken me longer to write out an email or to number the paragraphs, that type of thing.
That's great advice. Yeah. That's really great advice. Last comment about that, sometimes literally somebody could meet with you, give you their Ames page, one page, not 12 pages, but, and say, here, Vic, would you please look at this right here? I'll watch you read for 2 minutes and now give me feedback. That is very realistic in grant reviews. Really, people are moving very quickly. And sometimes you want a thoughtful, deep prepared response, but sometimes you want, like, let me hit you with this, and how is it at the end? Do you want to know more? Are you troubled by anything you read? That way of getting feedback is actually quite valuable.
I love that. And even just saying, hey, read it here, because that's what's going to happen when they reach on the plane or read it in for real life. They're going to read it quickly. And if they are asking questions of you, I don't understand how you're enrolling these. If that's not clear, your answer can be, oh, it's in there, but that also means that it's not clear. So that immediate reaction tells you that it's not clear and you need to fix that in there. Or what's your career development plan? Or what's your pilot data in there? If they're asking questions after they read it quickly, it's not clear. But that's actually a good response. I like that.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift slightly, because one of the things that makes you unique and special in the world is that your research is very focused on active duty service people and the health care they need in their families. Can you tell us a little bit about the way you specialize in your Center of Excellence?
Sure, absolutely. So I run the Center for Combat Research. It's called the Center for Combat Medicine and Battlefield Research here at University of Colorado. And we focused on, as we say, saving lives in the battlefield and at home, and then turning any military medical research gains into better health care for everybody. Part of that is we actually apply as a sponsor to the Department of Defense, or work with folks who work to the VA as a sponsor, and some work overlaps with NIH researchers as well. But our primary sponsor is around Department of Defense, and there are different offices that fund research in that space. So we target what's their needs, what their gaps, what their process is like, to try and do research that's impactful to them, which is a different focus and process than NIH and the VA, different scopes and budget. And that's how we focus some of our research as well.
And what are some of the things that you have to target specifically for these type of grants?
So, what the Department of Defense is always trying to solve problems immediately, not a 20-year, 10-year timeline. So they're looking for research that's going to change practice, change policy, change training, not in 15 years, but in 3 to 4 years or 2 to 3 years. And so that type of research is what they're looking for. So we work with our investigators to make sure that they're thinking about that. There can be some basic science in the application, but the end result is something that's going to hopefully change practice at the end of that project or very soon after, maybe a follow-on project. That's really important for them, and that's what they're being responsive to.
That is definitely a different valence. If you know at the end you haven't only prepared yourself for the next grant, but rather you're preparing a solution that somebody, or a big somebody, an institution, is going to act on. They need actionable information, which if you think, okay, at the end of this 3-year grant, I need to have an answer that the Army could use, for instance, then I'm going to scope it differently because that's the end.
That's right.
It's not the manuscript in the next grant, which, everybody wants to get to impact, but some mechanisms are more on the 10-year plan or a research agenda, a program of research. But you're designing studies to have baby steps that may be quite big, but that there's a solution at the end of each of these steps.
That's right.
Is that right?
And it's a little complex, but it is exactly right. So the Department of Defense does fund what they call fundamental science, or what we call basic science. So they call it fundamental. They fund translational science, but there has to be an arc to some future use, and it has to be somewhat soon. They do fund work that's like DARPA, that's very fundamental, that's basic science that hopefully will light 1,000 ideas going forward. But the majority of DoD medical research is around moving toward a solution, moving toward a plan for FDA, moving toward final product or final knowledge product. And that's putting that team together to answer that's important. Commonly in a DoD grant, there's a transition plan and the end of it. And for a DoD grant, that's important. What is it? Who's going to pick this up? Who's going to fund the next phase? How are you going to implement this in education, training, and policy? That's actually a very important component. That's different than a lot of other Federal sponsors, some foundations like that too. They want action right away. What's the community engagement? But from a federal perspective, that's fairly unusual.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things we have learned from other researchers talking to us about DoD grants versus NIH grants is that often you want an active duty collaborator. So you want an insider as part of the end user on your research team
Right.
to help you shape that arc to something that is useful. Can you talk to us about how, if people are interested in doing research in this space, how do you find those collaborators if you're just an early career researcher starting out?
It's a good question. So going back to the need, it's somewhat like PCORI in that you want someone in that community to be a part of the award so that you're writing to the real need. I think the mistake sometimes researchers make who are civilian or not related to the military, they write a research grant for the DoD that's kind of squished into what they need. It's not really what they need. And the best way to find out what they need is to work in a partnership with a military organization, active duty service member, or active duty service leader about what they need. Maybe it's a co-investigator or site or somehow, so that you're really addressing the needs of the military for that research funding. So that's really important and it's valuable. And to the Combat Center, we do that often and quite well. The question then is, how do you find that connector and leader? And that can be a challenge. Our service members, their primary job is to prepare for war and battle and training in medicine and trauma. There is a large subset of folks who do research, but they're also busy and work with a lot of other researchers. So sometimes it's someone in your region that you can work with. Sometimes you can see who's doing research in the space who is a service member and reach out to them as well. And sometimes through us, through the Combat Center, reach out to us and we have contacts of those folks who do that and then can say this could be a co-investigator, this could be a site, this could be a partner, this could be an office that says this research is important to the Special Operations Command or something like that. Any of those types of engagements are important to get good products for the DoD through research.
We've heard other people talk about conferences to meet other people who either fund this work or do this kind of work. Are there military medicine research conferences that tend to be places where you could go just like any other, whether you're doing, heart health or, ortho or fill in the blank?
Absolutely. I think that is important. So there's a few conferences, a couple of big ones. There's where both the sponsors are there, program officers are there, but also folks who are, have been injured by this type of illness or affected by it, but also active duty researchers or civilian researchers that work for the DoD. The Military Health System Research Symposium is every August. There's a Special Operations meeting every May. And there's a couple of other organizations, American College of Surgeons, that has large, and the Critical Care Medicine Conference that has large groups of active duty researchers at those meetings. And to engage with those, they're often very eager to collaborate and bring their knowledge of the service with your knowledge of translational work, drug development, device development together that are very helpful. And folks ministry, they'll be at that meeting as well, who can bring novel solutions, devices to the question at hand with you as a maybe civilian researcher and an active duty service member or team as well.
We were actually, can I pick up on, you mentioned devices. We were talking about drug and devices because Joe's working for a cancer drug company.
Absolutely.
And I was saying, I think the work of studying and preparing devices is actually quite similar to drugs, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how that might work in this combat space?
Yeah. For military research, they are often looking for solutions. And we divide it in two things. One's a knowledge product, which is, a big trial comes out and says, this is, providers should now, give fluids earlier than later, or maybe give antibiotics sooner than later, or blood sooner than later. So it's a knowledge product. When do you do it? The other category is material solutions, which is a thing, a device, an app, a drug, some sort of wearable. So So those are your two big groups, and they're very focused on that, and they call that advanced development for those. When you look at material solutions, there's devices and drugs, and both of those require several steps to get approved or used for the FDA. They're similar but different. Some would say that the timeline for drugs is longer because of toxicity and the different experiments you need to get to the end, and that the solutions for devices are a little shorter because currently the bar is just different to get devices approved, especially if they're a non-invasive device that goes on your skin versus something that goes in your heart or in your liver. But they are interested in, do you know, if you're studying a device or drug, how to go to the next step. It's not just good enough to study a drug, but who's your team, what's your plan, where is the resources coming for to go past this study to the next phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial, and they have a plan to go to get it FDA approved so they can be put into trucks, rucks, and backpacks, which is sort of their concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. I know about the drug side of that because I'm working with cancer research, so we're using first in human trials.
Yeah.
It takes, I think the average span is like 7 years between like in an animal to actually approved by the FDA.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
I could imagine that a device would go a lot faster than that.
It does. And people would say even it may be longer than 7 years.
Yeah.
All it takes is one, not stumble, but oh my gosh, there's some liver injury, or oh my gosh, the manufacturing's off, goes from 7 to 10. But devices, just the way the approvals are faster in general.
Especially if it's not going to be in your body.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, I mean, you get a
Yeah.
pacemaker, like you better be darn sure this is
That's
not
right.
going to hurt the person,
Yeah.
right?
High risk, in your body,
Right.
it's going to be working on its own, and all those things matter.
Right. But a
Um,
sticker,
yeah.
okay,
I feel like it works or it doesn't.
well, and could it, work by itself?
Right. Is it
shocking
harmful?
you?
Yeah. Is it, if it fails, are you going to die? A glucose monitor might be there, but a wearable checking your, heart rate or blood pressure, it's a health device, but if it doesn't work for a day or two, it's not going to kill you. So the threat is lower. But in general, devices do move much faster. So, and the DoD knows this, a lot of agencies know this, so they will sometimes lean toward devices because they know they can get
They can
those.
turn it
Yeah.
faster.
And then
Interesting.
it's a little less expensive too than drug development.
Partly because of the timeline, right?
Correct.
And the risk.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, both.
Okay, now, thank you. Pretend we have novice researcher or other novice researchers. I know the Combat Center has a scholars program working with, undergrad medical students, nursing students, PhD students who have some desire to do high impact research, and they're interested in something related to battlefield medicine. Can you talk to us about how you help people do a first project or get a first experience in this space to even just the very first baby step to build a career that might include this kind of research?
Absolutely. We think so. At the Center for Combat Research, as you mentioned, we have a Scholars and Fellows program. So we take graduate students, as you mentioned, College of Nursing, College of Medicine, Pharmacy, Dental, and work with them to get them excited about research and hopefully have some success. We have a Fellows program that's for folks who are residency and training or fellowship and training or postdocs who also want to get that experience, get them excited, and hopefully have success as well. We look at folks, it's a competitive program as our example, and we want folks who have some interest in service members and their needs. They don't have to be military or have worked in the military, but we want them to have an interest in that field.
So something that's just coming from them.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we like to start with that, and then we take their interest, and then we look with what resources we have to align it. Sometimes people have an interest, but their interest is, it's too big, and that's okay. Part of the goal is to say, okay, I've got a good research project. How do I get down to something I can do as a second-year medical student or first-year dental student? which means I don't have a full team and I don't have a lot of time and I have classes. So we take their idea and then we bring it down to what's feasible. And then we say, well, here's what we have the ability to do for this. Typically, it's more like data sets and retrospective data. Sometimes we have some device development or reviews on a certain topic we can do. And so we scope it down for them because we want them to have a good experience, meet with very good mentors who are supportive of them, so we can hopefully get them excited, get their first publication, ideally first author, first presentation. That's really a magical moment when a trainee goes to a meeting and presents their poster and very senior people coming to them, asking them about what they do, and they feel the visibility of it. That gets them excited. And then we hope they continue down that path, and we can develop a broader workforce for us around military medicine of these folks who are in 2 or 3 and 5 and 7 years. We're going to keep doing this sponsored research in the future.
How do you set up that presentation, or when does that typically happen? Like
for a
when you're saying a trainee has a good presentation and people notice, where does that usually happen, or how?
That's a good question. So we have them work on a project. So we recruit them in, good talent, motivated, detail focused. They work with their mentors or research mentors. We have the initial study or data set put together. We submit an abstract to a national meeting, maybe like the Military Health Symposium meeting. And since they put together their first author, we support them to go to the meeting. And they're at that national meeting with 5,000 people. 20 to 100 people come by and talk to them and say, why'd you do it this way? And, what's your answer? What do you want to do in your life? And it's all kinds of questions come up. And it really boosts their confidence. And it's a really good experience for them to go, I thought I was just looking at charts and data, but here I am, experts are coming to me for real questions. And it really, I find those moments, it inspires them to continue down this research path. They can become a doctor or a nurse or a dentist or whatever, but they love that experience because then they're excited about it to go forward for the next project.
Did you always know that you wanted to do something like this in research, or how did you get here?
No, I have a very unconventional path. I went to college. I was at the Air Force Academy, and I was supposed to go to Peru for an immersion experience between my junior and senior year, and someone said, you can't go to medical school without a research experience. And so I said, I guess I better go do a research experience. Didn't go to Peru, had a research experience, which was okay, not awesome. And I thought that was it. I'll never do research again. But it kept drawing me back. In medical school, I was into the clinical experience and the education. At the end, I didn't really want to do research, but I thought I'd give it a run. And it was a very painful project. But for some reason, I liked it. But I didn't think research was my future. I didn't have a lot of good research mentors at the time. Went to residency, bumbled through that for 4 years. At the end, when I started fellowship, I had a mentor, in my case, toxicology, who had the same philosophy. I want to make it easy for you. I want to make it exciting for you. You can get a win out of this. I think you'll like it. And that's when it clicked. And that's when I was excited, and I had that moment, a national meeting, when people were asking me at my first publication. And from there, the excitement grew to a research career, because you've got to have resiliency and optimism in research, where you're going to have a lot of misses and a lot of critical comments, and so you got to be in a position where you're still optimistic despite those. And I hit that point around fellowship and right after. But the first several times, I was like, this is not for me.
Okay, so it was your first grant that you got funded,
Yes.
where it was like, all right, this feels good.
That's right.
Well, you did have some before where you did fail?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
and you just kept going, or how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that's as I say, the road to success for me was built on failures. If you put a sign over, it's Bebarta Boulevard.
Oh,
We had so many failures.
Oh,
As a way to fail, I figured it out. Yeah.
Well, you gotta close all other avenues, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
God, not that
Refocus.
one.
But it takes that. But it takes someone. For me, it was a mentor that said, "That's okay. I know that's hard, but let me help you with this. I know you didn't get it, but let's try this again. And it's okay. This is what you need to do. You need someone at that early, in my mind, tender stage where you're not really sure what you're going to do, because you could go off and go to industry or go see patients or whatever that drew you in. And it takes some resilience at the time to say, okay, this is exciting. Like, I want to change lives in this way. Like, that's my tool or my weapon is to have success. So, I had a grant. My first one was a small grant and fellowship, and I had a mentor that recommended I do it and helped me through it and probably did more work than he probably should have on it. And then we spent hundreds of hours. It was for $10,000, which sounded like a lot back then. And I turned it in, and we turned it in late. Missed the deadline for it. Luckily, my mentor, it was a small foundation, and they were able to say, you know what, can we just still accept it? So they let us accept it, and a couple others as well. We got it, and we did the work, and our work was far more than $10,000 worth of work, but I learned a lot about the process and just supported people who said, don't worry, this is how it goes. Don't worry, we can figure this out. And that got me in a position to feel like I could succeed. And then I did not get my next 3, and then I got my 4th one, and on from there. So it's like anything, though. It's not just research. It's clinical medicine. It's business leadership. Like, you need to have good mentors. You need to be prepared to fail. I always say it's not the setback, it's the comeback. Like, when you get knocked down, that's okay. We all get knocked down. But now what are you going to do to make it easier the next time? Who are you going to help? Who's going to help you next time? Where are you going to go after next time? That optimism is key for success, for researchers for sure.
Actually, listening to you tell this story, I haven't heard these stories. I love the idea that you're creating an early win so people have something to hold on to, because that can be such a high, especially for a very novice researcher. And generally, super senior people are really generous. They want to help. They're not going to be like, what are you doing here, kid? You're going to be like, hey, good job. Tell me more. What were you thinking? They're just going to try to encourage people and then I do think it floats your boat in those downtimes.
Absolutely.
To hold on to that feeling. You need the feeling one time to know how it can be. So if you can get somebody to support you to that can keep you going. Right?
It is about that relationship early on with that, mentor. My daughter has a wonderful mentor at university, and the topic is interesting. She does care about it. But she had a bad mentor who was not supportive or was too harsh. She wouldn't pursue it. But this mentor is so supportive, and let me help you optimize the application. Let me tell you what it looks like. Let me tell you what cool stuff that I'm doing at this level. I'm changing policy for the state around this particular topic. You could do that too one day. Like, that lights you up to keep moving ahead. So it's really important to have that or seek that out. If you know that's important, to seek that relationship out is key to move forward.